The Mermaid's Message by Maud Lindsay. Down, down, down in the deep blue sea lived a mermaid. Mermaids are sea-fairies, and they have beautiful homes under the deep waters, with sponges and sea-anemones growing in their gardens instead of flowers like our lilies and roses. They are very happy too, and this little mermaid was merry all the time as she darted here, there, and everywhere, joining the shining fishes in their play of swimming around to stir the ripples into circles. Then, when she was tired, she would sit and sing while she made her crowns of coral and shells, or strung a chain of pearls which the oysters gave her. Sometimes, too, when the stars were out and the moon was bright, she would come up and ride on the backs of the great waves as the winds blew them far out after the ships or rolled them in to the shore. One night, as she rode so gaily there, the ripples ran back to the shore with pleasant news to tell. "Today," said the ripples, "we chased each other up on the beach, and there, playing in the sand, were the dearest little children, and when they saw us dancing with the sunbeams, they stretched out their hands to us, and oh, how we wanted to slip up and kiss their little feet, but we dared not do it." "Dear little children," said the mermaid, and the waves repeated it over, "Dear little children," in such a big voice that it sounded along the shore with a boom. Then the ripples ran away and the waves rolled on. But the mermaid still thought of the children, and wished again and again that she could tell them that she loved them. At last she thought of something that pleased her very much, and she slipped down from the wave and back to her home in a great hurry, for she remembered her stores of shells and wanted to send them as a present to the children. So she selected the prettiest ones, smooth and twisted, lined with pink and purple, and to one, the largest of all, she whispered a message, and she hastened up just in time to catch a great wave on its way to the shore. The wave was glad to carry the shells, so she gave them into his keeping, and he tossed them far up on the yellow sand, and they lay there waiting through the quiet night until the sunbeams came and brought the children out. The children spied the shells immediately, and then there was such a rejoicing. Mammas, nurses, and everybody had to look at each new treasure as it was found, and one mamma told about the wee creatures that had lived in each one long ago, while the children peeped into the pretty shell houses and wondered how it would feel to have a shell for a home. Then there were gardens to make, with broad shell-bordered walks, and seaweed to plant in the round sand beds. But at last a little boy found the shell that carried the mermaid's message, and when he held it to his ear, it repeated the message, soft and low like the sound of the sea. Over and over it told the message as each child listened, and they knew that it was a message, and though they could not guess who sent it or what it meant, they were sure it was a sweet one, and so it was, for the mermaid had said, "I love you." "Let's whisper something to it ourselves," said the children, "the very nicest thing we can." And so it happened that a little girl whispered the words her mamma loved best, and they threw the shell far out into the water, and it dropped down, down, down to the bottom of the blue sea, where the mermaid found it, and when she heard the message she knew the meaning, and it was just as sweet as her own had been, for the child had said, "We love you."
The Wooden Horse by Lily Parks Gunnell. Hundreds and hundreds of years before the Christ child came, so the legends tell us, when the people believed there were many gods who were so interested in the affairs of men that they often came down to help them fight their battles, and sometimes, alas, to punish them for their wrongdoings, there lived in a Grecian city called Sparta the brave King Menelaus and his beautiful wife Helen. She was so wondrously beautiful that many people traveled from afar to see her, for the Greeks loved the beautiful, and particularly did they love to see a beautiful man or woman. The poets wrote songs of her, some of which have come down through all the years to us, celebrating her surpassing beauty. There came one time to visit Menelaus the king, Paris, the son of Priam, king of Ilion, which is known also as Troy. Paris admired Helen so much that he wanted to take her away with him to his father's city. So one dark night, some of his men helped him carry her off to his ship, and then they sailed away across the blue Aegean Sea to Ilion. When King Menelaus found that his beautiful wife was gone, and that the ships of Paris were nowhere in sight, he knew at once what had happened. The guest whom he had entertained and made welcome had done him this cruel wrong. Then Menelaus was very angry. He called his trusted friends and brave soldiers together, and lost no time in going aboard his own ships, for he was at the port, and setting sail for Ilion in order to punish the wicked Paris and bring back the fair Helen. When they arrived at Ilion, they could not get inside the city, so they pitched their tents nearby and waited. In those days the cities had high walls built all around them, except Sparta, whose men were so brave and warlike that they defended their city many years without the aid of a wall. And these high walls had great strong gates through which the people passed out and in. The gates were guarded day and night, and sentinels were always looking in every direction for any enemies who might come that way. Though the Spartans watched and waited, they could not gain an entrance through any one of the 6 gates of Troy. At last, after besieging Troy for 10 long years, someone thought of a plan. They built a great wooden horse, hollow inside and large enough to hold several men. Then they told the Trojans that they had decided to return to their own country. The wooden horse, they said, was built as an offering to the sea god, to ensure them a safe voyage home. And if, after they had left, the Trojans would take it inside their walls, the sea god would always take care of them and keep them safe whenever they went sailing on the seas. The Trojans were glad the siege was to be ended at last, and believing what was told them about the wooden horse, they were very glad to have it. After the Spartans had put some of their bravest men inside the wooden horse and made believe that they had gone away, the Trojans came out and dragged it inside and locked the gate. When all had become quiet and the people were sound asleep, for they thought that all danger was past now, and that they could sleep in perfect safety, the Spartans came out of the wooden horse very quietly, overcame the sentinels, and unlocked the gates. All the Spartans, who had turned round and come back again as soon as it was dark, came in through the gates. The Trojans, being taken by surprise, were beaten, and Menelaus was very happy when he had his beautiful wife once more. He took her to his ship, and they all sailed safely back to Greece. They were very glad to be at home again, after having been away for so many years, and the Spartans were glad too, to have with them their own Helen, the most beautiful woman in the whole world.
Chapter 3 Up to the Sky and Back by Catherine Orr. One day, just a little while ago, the great sun far up in the sky said to his little helpers, the sunbeam fairies, "Dear fairies, I shall need a great many clouds next week, and I should like to have you help me make them." This made the fairies very happy. They were so happy that they ran back and forth from the sun to the earth a great many times. They were very happy little fairies, and they were always happy when they were helping someone. The sunbeam fairies had helped the sun so many times that they knew just how to go to work. Some of the fairies ran down to a great hot city, and they found some drops of water on the stones and on top of some of the houses, and they carried them right up to the sun just as fast as they could. Some of the other fairies went down into the country early in the morning, and they gathered some drops of dew in the fields and some drops of water that were down by the grass's feet. The rest of the little fairies ran down to a little brook and carried just as many drops from it as they could. By and by the great sun said, "Dear little sunbeams, you have brought me so many drops of water that I have enough to make a great many clouds, for you know that the clouds are made of a great many drops of water." After the great sun had the clouds all ready, he thought, "Now if the wind were here, I am sure that he would blow the clouds just where I want them to go." Soon the sun heard the wind coming, and then he said, "Can you help me today? I have a great many clouds to send out, and I want them to go to different places." The wind said that he would be very glad to go, Then the sun said, "Away over in the city the streets are very hot and the trees are thirsty, so please take these clouds over there and give the city a drink." By and by the clouds were right over the city, and soon the little raindrops went falling down on the houses and the trees and the streets. And they were all glad to have a drink. And the same little drops of water that the sunbeam fairies had carried from the city were now back in their old places just where they were before. Then the wind went back to the sun and said, "Dear sun, I have taken those clouds to the city. Now where shall I take the other?" And the sun said, "The farmers in the country would like the rain to make their grass grow. So take these clouds over into the country." The wind blew very hard, and soon the clouds were up over the fields. In a few minutes the raindrops were hurrying down on the fields. And do you know, the same raindrops which the fairies carried from the fields fell in the same fields again, so the little drops of water were just where they were before the fairies touched them. While the wind was away this time, the sun looked down upon the earth and saw a little brook in which was just a little water. And he thought, "The fishes in that brook need more water, so I will send a cloud over there." When he heard the wind, he said, "Please take these clouds over by that brook." And the wind did so. And the rain fell down in the brook, and the fishes had plenty of water. And it is so funny, those same little drops of water which the fairies took from the brook fell right back into it again. So you see, the little drops went up by the sun, and then came back again. And this was all because the little sunbeam fairies carried the drops of water up by the sun, and because the wind blew the clouds just where the sun thought they ought to go. So you see, we have to thank the sun, the sunbeam fairies, and the wind for giving us and everything on the earth a drink. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Father Time and His Children, by Mary Helen Power. There once lived an old man whose name was Time, and he had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. The boys' names were Winter and Autumn, and the girls' names were Spring and Summer. Now Father Time was very fond of his boys and girls, and he was always doing something to make them happy. But he believed that it was best for children to have some work to do, and not to play all the time. So he told Winter, who was the oldest, that he should expect him to look after the snow and the ice, North Wind, and Jack Frost. Winter was delighted with his work, for he was very fond of the snow, and North Wind and Jack Frost were particular friends of his, and many a merry time these 3 had together after their work was done. One of the things that they loved very much to do was to freeze over the rivers and ponds so that the boys and girls might have skating. Summer, Winter's eldest sister, had a great deal to do, for she had all of the flowers and vegetables to care for, but it was a pleasure for her to take care of the flowers because she loved them so much. She would coax the sun to shine warmly and the rain to fall softly upon them. Then the little flowers would lift their heads, and when the morning breeze passed them by, they would give him their very sweetest perfume, which was their way of saying thank you. Spring was the little baby sister, and everyone loved her very much, because she was always so happy and glad. One day Father Time told Spring that she might take care of the little seeds that were lying fast asleep in the ground, and the buds on the trees. Then Spring was happy indeed, because she had been afraid that perhaps Father Time might think she wasn't old enough to do any work, and she wanted very much to help. So she made up her mind to do the best she could. And she sent the April showers to awaken the little seeds, and then she sent the sunbeams to help them come to the light. And the sunbeams and the showers helped the buds to blossom. So when the trees were all in bloom, everyone said that springtime was the most beautiful time of the whole year. Autumn Time, the youngest brother, was a very busy little fellow. He was very fond of bright colors, and sometimes wore a scarlet and yellow jacket. His work was to help the grains, the fruit, and the nuts to ripen. Now Autumn knew that this work was very important, and that the farmers depended on him for their harvest. So he said to himself, "I'll do the best I can, and I'll get the sun to help me." The sun was glad to help Autumn, and they worked very hard together, so that when the harvest time was over, and the farmers had filled their barns with the grain and fruit, they found that they had enough to last them until autumn came again. Father Time was very much pleased with his children's work. They all did so well that he never could tell which one did best. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Frost Fairies and the Water Drops, by Anna H. Littell. Sparkle, Bubble, and Ball were the 3 little water drops who lived down by the shore of the lake. When Mr. Wind came to see them, they had a very lively play. They would jump up high and chase one another. Then all the brother and sister Waterdrops and a great many of the cousins would take hold of hands, jump up as high as they could, and tumble over on the white, clean sand on the beach. Then they had a nice slide back into the lake. Sometimes they played hide-and-seek, and slipped down under the pebbles on the beach and had a happy play. But, best of all, they loved to play with the children. Little boys and girls with pails and spades dug many a well in the sand. Then the Waterdrops had fine fun playing, falling into the wells, then running away in the sand. One bright sunny day, when Mr. Wind was asleep, the little Waterdrops grew sleepy too, and lay very still. Then two of the children, Robert and Ernest, took their rowboat from the boathouse to have a ride on the lake. The oars dipping into the water awoke some of the Waterdrops, and they began to sing softly around the boat. Ripple, 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 was what they sang. Then the sunbeams, who had come to visit the Waterdrops, smiled so brightly that the little drops sparkled like diamonds, as they said, "Oh, Sunshine, we wish we could go far up to the sky with you. We've jumped as high as we could, but we always fall back again." Sunshine said, "Do you want to go away from such a happy home? If you go with me, you must travel a very long distance, but you will see a great many beautiful things, and learn to do many helpful deeds. Perhaps you may go to see the flowers, and help some thirsty plant to smile and grow." "Yes, we want to go," the little Waterdrop said. "Please do take us with you." "Yes, I will," said Sunshine, "if Mr. Wind will come to help us." Then the little Waterdrops felt themselves rising slowly upward toward the sky, and the children on the sand looking at them said, "Oh, see the steam going up?" Then the Waterdrops laughed. "The children call us steam. What fun!" But Ernest's mother said, "No, that is not steam, though it is something like it. It is our little friends the Waterdrops taking a ride with the sunbeams. They are scattered into such fine bits that they look like steam. Some day they will come back to visit us." "Goodbye, little Waterdrops," the children said. "We shall watch to see you come back." Higher, higher up went the Waterdrops. "I think we must be almost up to the sky," said one little drop. "We are near the top of a mountain. See what a big white cap he has." The cap was a big snow cloud, and the wind carried some of the Waterdrops close to the cloud. It was so cold that all the cloud children were busy making pretty white coats that were soft as wool. The Waterdrops began to do the same work, just as the teacher, who was a frost fairy, taught them to do. Up at the top of the mountain were some green fir trees and some little plants and vines with red berries. It was so very cold that the Waterdrops, with white coats, flew down to help keep the roots warm. They looked like little white birds flying through the air. The children saw them flying down and shouted, "Here come the snowflakes! See what pretty stars! Here's one with 6 points, and there's one with 6 sides." "Oh ho!" laughed Sparkle and his cousins. "Now the children call us snowflakes. When we came away they called us steam. I wonder if they know that we are the same old playmates who used to sing and play by the shore of the lake." Bubble and Ball and a great many of the cousins were blown far away from the top of the mountain to the Rain-Cloud's home. The little water particles clung closer and closer together till they formed round drops again. Then they began to fall. "Oh," said little Bubble, "here we go. I wonder if we shall see the flowers when we reach the ground. I should like to give them a nice drink." But it was cold weather, and the flowers were fast asleep. Some of the raindrops jumped into the lake, and others on the rocks and sand on the shore. They had a very busy time when the frost fairies came to teach them to make pretty white crystals that looked like stars. The drops that had fallen into a crack of a rock found they needed more room to play at star-making. They pushed until the crack was wider to make room for their star points. Some water drops fell into a bottle on the sand. They were so crowded that they did not have room enough to make perfect star crystals. They tried to do their best and pushed against the sides of the bottle until it broke. Then they had plenty of room. The raindrops that fell into the lake began to dance and play with the little friends they met there. "Where did you come from?" asked all the little friends. "From the Cloudland," said the little raindrops. "We lived in the lake before we went to live in Cloudland. We went on a long journey with the sunbeams." The frost fairies came to the lake too, and soon all the water drops were busy making crystals. They worked away all night, and when the sun shone brightly in the morning, it looked down upon a hard, smooth floor on the lake that seemed like glass. Robert and Ernest came with their sleds and skates. When they saw the lake, they shouted, "Hurrah, how smooth and hard the ice is!" "Oh," said Bubble and Ball, "the children call us ice now. I wonder if they know that we are the same old playmates who used to sing and play on the shore of the lake in the summertime." End of Chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of the Mermaid's Message and Other Stories. Chapter 6 March's Call by Maud L. Betts. Hoo, hoo! March was certainly calling someone. Who could it be? The children came out and flew their kites and rolled their hoops, laughing when the wind blew their hats off and made them race down the hill after them. But still he went on calling. It must be someone else he wanted. The birds were too far away and most of them to hear him. Who could it be? Down under the ground there was quite a commotion. Little rootlets were spreading out this way and that, and there was such a whispering and laughing going on. What was the matter? Why, March had been calling the flowers, and they were all awake, beginning to grow with all their might, and having such fun over it that you would have thought it was all play. They were in a great hurry to push their way through the ground and brighten the world with their blossoms. Are you ready? It's time we were starting, called Snowdrop, her voice fairly bubbly over the laughter at the thought of the surprise she would be when she popped her head out. Yes, yes, called the others. Go on, we'll follow you. It's too cold for me to go just yet, said Crocus, but I'll be there as soon as dear old bluebirds begin singing. I'll bring my silver and gold blossoms, cried Narcissus, and my bells will be ringing before your blossoms fade, laughed Hyacinth. And even while she was speaking, 2 rootlets found a chance to creep down into the cool earth to find some food for the little plant. Violet was so busily at work growing that she did not talk as much as the others. But the very first morning she popped her head into the violet bonnet above the ground, she whispered, I'm here! The whole air grew sweet with her fragrance, and the children said, Spring has come, for Violet's here. Dear brave little flowers, they never grumbled all through the long cold winter that they had to stay under the ground. They were sure that the loving Father who gave them their work to do knew what was best for them. Their long resting time helped them to work better, so when March called, they were ready to jump up and go happily and busily to work growing, so that soon they might brighten the world with their blossoms. No wonder they laughed and were so happy. End of Chapter 6. Read by Charlie Data.
Chapter 7, Joe's Rosebush by Helen Meader. You can see Joe every day standing on the corner selling papers. Now, who is Joe? Why, a little newsboy, and I want to tell you a story about him. One day, as Joe was passing along the street with his papers under his arm, he saw in the florist's window a rose bush growing in a box. It was not a very large bush, but its leaves looked very green, and peeping out of the middle was the loveliest pink rose. It looked so proud, and seemed to gaze right in Joe's eyes, as much as to say, See how clean and fresh I look, while yes, I can count 2 buttons gone from your coat, and I see dirt on your face. Poor little Joe, he looked long at that pretty rose, and only left when he heard the other boys calling, Buy your papers! Papers for sale! He knew he must sell his papers, for if he didn't, where would his dinner come from? When the whistle blew at 12 o'clock, he had sold just 8 papers, and then he knew he could buy doughnuts for his dinner. As he was going to the bakery, he stopped to take one more look at his rose friend. As he lingered before the window, a gentleman came up and stood beside him and asked him if he thought the rose bush pretty, and if he would like it. Joe told him how he had wished for it that morning, but had no money to buy rose bushes. The gentleman, how kind it was of him, paid $1 to the florist, and then put the box with its pretty bush in Joe's arms. The rose nodded its head, as much as to say, Glad you've got me. Glad you've got me. It was hard for such a little fellow to carry the box up 2 long flights of stairs, but he went very slowly, and when he reached his room, he put his rose friend on the window-sill, then sat beside it to eat his doughnuts. One morning, Joe opened his sleepy eyes to look at his pretty rose friend, but this time, how sad it looked! No bright face. All the leaves had dropped and faded in the night. What was the trouble? As soon as Joe's little legs could carry him, he ran to tell the florist his troubles. Now listen to what the man said to Joe. "First water, then fresh air, then sunshine is what we give our roses. Did you give these 3 things to yours, Joe?" "Yes," said Joe, "all but the sunshine, and how could I give it that when it never comes in my room?" sobbed the poor little fellow. "What can I do?" he thought. I know, the roof, I can put it on the roof." Out he ran so fast that everyone laughed. He found a nice sunny corner up on that high roof, away from everything but the sky and God's sunshine. And the next morning the pink rose lifted up her pretty face and once more looked at Joe. And when the April showers came, how nice it was to have the green leaves all washed, so clean and bright. One morning Joe had a great surprise. There among the pretty leaves was the dearest pink baby rosebud, all wrapped in its green blanket. You can see Joe's happy face every day on the corner, and if you ask the other newsboys why he looks so happy, they will tell you it is because he has a new baby rosebud on his roof at home. End of Chapter 7.
Chapter 8. The Giant and the Fairy by Evelyn Lincoln. Once upon a time there lived a giant in the land where giants live. There lived also a fairy among the flowers of the garden and by the mossy places in the woods down by the brook. Now the giant was big and strong and powerful. He thought he had only to speak and everybody would do just what he wished. He always said "won't" when anyone asked him for help. After a while he stopped smiling because he said "I won't" so many times that his mouth was drawn down at the corners. The fairy was tiny and not very strong, but she was always smiling brightly and saying "will" if people wanted her to help them. Little I Will went to visit boys and girls, and she liked to see them smile and say "will" just as she did. One day the fairy I Will lay down under a violet near the brook, which tinkled over the stones like sweet music. She was soon fast asleep. Soon after, the giant I Won't, who was taking a walk, sat down beside the violet where I Will was lying. The brook soothed him to sleep also. That same day a little boy named Frank came with his nurse and sister to the brook to play. "Let's play that we are fishes," said his sister. "No, I won't," exclaimed Frank. The cross giant opened his eyes, looked at the boy, and said to himself, "He is one of my kind. His mouth is drawn down at the corners, and he will be as cross as I am when he gets to be a man." Then Frank said to his sister, "May, I am going to paddle in the brook. Will you?" "Oh, yes," said May, "I will. That will be great fun." The fairy I Will opened her eyes and looked at May. She was such a dear, sweet little girl that everybody loved her. She liked to help other people and nearly always said "will." While the children were playing, the giant had a great thought. He had no boys of his own and wanted one very much to teach him to be another I Won't. So he sprang up, took Frank in his arms, and with great strides walked off to Giant Land. "But I won't!" screamed Frank. "That's just what I want you to say," said the giant. Whenever Giant I Won't asked Frank to do anything, Frank would say, "I won't, I won't, I won't, I want to go home." Then the giants would laugh until the tears ran down their cheeks. "Oh, no, you can't go home," said the giant. "You are too much like us, and nobody wants a boy at home who is always saying 'I won't.'" So Frank had to stay with the giants. One day he was crying very hard and wishing he could go home to see his kind father and mother and little May. "Oh dear," he sobbed, "I will do anything they want me to, if I can only go home." Just then a small voice whispered in his ear, "I am the fairy I will. This is the first time you have said, 'I will.' Now, if you are sure you will help your papa and mamma and do what they ask you to do without saying 'I won't,' you shall go home with me." Frank did not stop to look at the giant I won't, but put his hand in I will's and was soon at home, happy. End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9, Pussies, by Anna B. Badlam. What do you think I found today, up in the loft among the hay? What but old Tab with her kittens 3, purring away so cozily. Puss had been gone for a day or two. Where she was visiting nobody knew, nor had she left a single trace. Yet I had found her hiding place. She glanced at me and gave a sleepy purr as I gently stroked her soft gray fur, then turned with a look of motherly pride to glance at the treasures by her side. She plainly said, "Did you ever see any lovelier babies than my 3? Sweet and gentle and loving too, they're the dearest children ever grew. There's White Paws with his fur so fine, there's Gray Back with a coat like mine, and little Snowball, soft as silk, with fur as white as old Moolie's milk." All this I heard in her joyful purr as I stood in the loft and looked at her and her kittens 3, cuddled away so cozily. Down by the brook a willow grew, and in its depths a shadow threw. Lo, on a twig so small and slight, my eyes beheld the queerest sight. 3 little pussies in coats of brown, lined with fur as soft as down. "What?" I said in quick surprise, as I gazed at the twig with startled eyes. "Dare Mother Tab's babies run away, and have they come to the brook to play?" But the wind came whispering to my ear, "Mother Tab's babies are not here. Her pussies are cuddled safe in the hay. These are willow buds at play. They are fairy pussies under a spell. Listen, and I'll the secret tell. Soon they'll throw off their coats of brown, lined with fur of softest down. Soon everyone will a catkin be, the dainty child of the willow tree."
Chapter 10. The Fox and the Stork, by Ellen F. Wiggin. One morning a fox, having finished his breakfast, started for a walk in the woods in the hope of finding some friend to talk with. And, as he walked along, he met on the shore of a pond a stork resting on one foot. The stork was quite willing to answer all the questions which the fox wished to ask, and, as he had a good deal of curiosity, he asked a good many. After they had said good morning and talked a little while, the fox asked, "How can you walk on one leg?" The stork laughed. "Why," said she, "I never do walk on one leg. Here is the other one tucked up here." And she showed it to him, drawn away up under her body. "It rests me to draw one leg up sometimes," she explained. "Well," said the fox, "that is a queer way to rest. But don't you find it rather hard to manage 2 such long, slim, red legs? Your legs are much taller than I am." "Oh, no," answered the stork. "Now I could wade out ever so far into that pond without wetting my feathers, and you, with your little short legs, would wet your fur coat if you tried to cross a brook." "But," said the fox, "what do you want such a long, broad bill for? None of the other birds have one." "Why, that is my fishing net," exclaimed the stork. "Don't you see? I put that way down under the water, and when I take it up, the water runs out of these strainers here on each side of it, but the fish are left, and I eat them. Some animals called men fish with nets which they use in just the way that I fish with my bill." The fox was so charmed with his new acquaintance and her instructive conversation that he invited her to dine with him the next day, and she very politely accepted. The fox went home, and while he was thinking what he should have for dinner the next day, the thought came to him. Wouldn't it be funny to play a joke on the stork? The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to do it. And at last, although he knew it was not a polite thing to do, he decided that he would play the joke. Accordingly, he worked very busily, and the next day when the stork arrived he was all ready. He invited her out to dinner. And what do you suppose that hungry stork saw? Why, nothing but soup served in flat dishes. Now you see, with her long bill, she could not even get a mouthful, but had to sit looking on and trying to eat, while the fox with his little tongue lapped out all the dishes. She saw that he had planned this to tease her, without thinking how uncomfortable she would feel having to go without her dinner, but she was not in the least angry. She tried to be very pleasant, and when leaving, invited the fox to dine in on a certain day with her. She thought that the best way to punish him for his joke was to let him feel, too, how uncomfortable it is to go without one's dinner, when one has been invited to take it with a friend. But what do you think she did? I fear you could never guess, so I shall have to tell you. On the day that she planned to have the fox to dinner, she rose early and flew about a great deal, so as to have everything ready by the time he arrived. And when she asked him to her table, I fear that he felt very much as the stork did when she saw his. There was no soup in flat dishes this time, but instead, there was some very nice chopped meat, which the fox was very fond of, but it was served in tall narrow-necked bottles, and the fox could only look at the meat. He could not eat it, for his nose was too short, and too large around to be poked down into the bottles. The stork seemed to enjoy her dinner very much indeed. Those bottles were well suited to her bill, and when she had finished, she smiled and said, I hope you enjoyed dining at my table as much as I did at yours the other day. The fox felt very much ashamed, and, when he left, he said he wished very much that she would come to dinner with him once more. He would try to make it pleasanter for her. She consented, and at that dinner the fox was careful to serve what was meant for the stork in long-necked dishes, and only his own dinner in the shallow plates.
Chapter 11. Tim's Cat by Alice Lotherington. Tim was a little boy with blue eyes and brown hair and such rosy cheeks that Grandma used to say he put her in mind of the winter apples that were gathered on her farm in the fall. Tim was quite a little man. He had worn knee pads for a whole year, and the next winter he was to have boots, rubber boots, so that he might go to kindergarten even if it did snow. Tim's birthday had come. He was 6 years old. Grandma, Grandpa, uncles, and aunts had sent a number of presents, but the only one that pleased the little boy most was Papa's gift. And what do you think it was? A kitten. A soft, white, fluffy little thing, which looked like a ball of cotton as it lay asleep in its basket. Kitty had to have a name, and after many talks with Mama and Papa about it, Tim thought Fluff would be just the thing. She was so nice and soft. So Kitty was named Fluff. Fluff was a wonderful cat. You should have seen her skip and jump. In a short time, she followed Tim just like a little dog. And when Tim whistled for her, you should have heard Tim whistle. Fluff would come to Tim as fast as she could. Fluff had quite a number of playthings, but the one she loved best was a ball tied to a string. She would take her paw and bat at it to and fro, jump and try to catch it, and have lots of fun. One day, as Fluff was playing with the ball, Tim, who used his eyes, learned something. Fluff had only 4 toes on each hind foot. Tim thought it very funny indeed. He knew that he had 5 toes on each of his feet and 5 fingers on each of his hands. So away he ran to tell Papa about it. Why, Tim, said Papa, cats only have 4 toes on each hind foot and 5 toes on each front foot. Then, said Tim, they have 18 toes instead of 20. Yes, said Papa. Bring Fluff to me and let us look at her paws. Tim put Fluff on Papa's knee, and Papa told Tim to squeeze her paws gently. Why, said Tim, here are 5 sharp claws. Yes, said Papa. Within soft paws, sharp claws are found. Fluff thought Tim wanted to play, so she made believe to bite him for fun. Oh, said Tim. As soon as Fluff heard Tim's voice, she started to lick his hand. My, said Tim, how rough her tongue is. I wonder what makes it so rough. You know how sharp Fluff's teeth are, Tim? Asked Papa. All animals that have claws and sharp teeth, like our Fluff, live on meat, are flesh-eating animals. Now about Fluff's tongue. Run to the kitchen and ask Mama for some milk while I mind Fluff. Tim started, and before Papa could take hold of Fluff, the kitten was at Tim's heels, and went into the kitchen too. But she came back when Tim did, and was very glad to get some nice sauce of milk which Tim's mama had given him for her. "How quickly Fluff drinks her milk," said Tim. "That is because her tongue is full of little cups that are so small we can't see them," said Papa. "When Fluff put her tongue in the milk, the little cups get full, and so Kitten is able to drink her milk quickly. These same little cups made her tongue so rough when she licked her hands a few minutes ago." Suddenly, Fluff, who had seemed to be fast asleep on Papa's knee, sprung up and jumped through the hole in the window screen, after a piece of straw that was blowing about the yard. "I never thought Fluff could get through that hole," said Tim. "Suppose she had stuck fast?" "Fluff knows better than that," answered Papa. "How can she tell?" exclaimed Tim. "Why, my boy, that is what her whiskers are for. If Fluff can get her whiskers through any place, she is pretty sure to get her whole body through too. Her whiskers are to her what our fingers are to us. She feels with them." By this time, Fluff had come back, and she stretched herself on the rug at Tim's feet. "Watch Fluff's eyes, Tim," said Papa, "and tell me how they look." "Why," said Tim, "the little opening in the center of the eyes is long and narrow, not round like ours." "That little opening is called the pupil," said Papa. "And now, Tim, go and play with Fluff, as I have letters to write." Away ran Tim for a romp in the garden with Fluff, who was as lively as possible. When Tim was older, his papa gave him a dog, and his uncle sent him a pair of rabbits, but there was no pet so dear to Tim as Fluff.
Chapter 12 Stanley and the Squirrels by Kate L. Brown. When Stanley went out to Brookline to live, it was late in the fall. The trees had on their bright dresses, and the nuts were dropping fast. The little boy was very fond of nutting. Every day he added to his store in the attic and talked of the fine times he and Grandpa would have cracking the nuts on winter nights. One day Mamma saw him dragging his little express cart up the avenue, laughing and shouting with delight. "Oh, Mamma!" he cried, bursting into the parlor. "I did find such a heap of nuts right in a hollow tree, low down. Why, they almost filled my cart." Mamma told Stanley to take off his coat and cap and put them away. Then he climbed up into her lap, and they sat looking into the fire. "Such a lot of nuts," sighed the little man. "Won't Grandpa be glad?" "I wonder how they got there, so many nuts in a heap," said Mamma. "Dropped down from the tree, didn't they?" "I don't believe so many nuts could drop in a heap just there," replied Mamma. "Perhaps some other little boy put them there." "I think some other boy would carry them home, just as my Stanley did." "Why, who did?" And Stanley's voice was perplexed. "It must have been a little gentleman in a brown striped dress who lives in a tree." "Do you mean the squirrels, Mamma?" "Yes, the squirrels. I think Mr. Chippy and his little mate gathered those nuts and laid them away for the winter with the greatest care. I can hear Chip say, 'See what a fine supply we shall have this winter for our 4 babies.' Now they won't have any," and Stanley's voice was most sober. "If you find another squirrel's storehouse, remember the hungry babies that must be fed." Just then the little boy's nurse came to call him to supper. The next morning Stanley was seen trotting down the avenue, dragging his cart behind him. About half an hour later he ran into his mamma with such a happy face. "I put every single nut back," he cried with dancing eyes. "Now the squirrel babies won't be hungry, will they? Wasn't it a good plan, Mamma?" "A very good plan, I think," replied Mamma. "Wouldn't it be a good plan to put some corn in the hole, too?" "An excellent plan, Stanley. Ask Jonas to give you half a dozen of the small ears." So Stanley added the corn to the squirrel's hoard. One day he saw Mr. Chippy on the bough overhead with a piece of the cob between his little paws. A bright-eyed squirrel came down near him, and the two chattered away. "See that kind little boy down there, my dear? He is the one who put our nuts back and gave us this delicious corn." This is what Mamma thought the squirrel might have said.
Chapter 13. A Story in a Cup of Cocoa by Alice May Douglas. "I never saw such an old world as this is," said Miles. "Seems to me I've heard all the stories there are in this world, and I'd like to move to another. Why, I know the whole of Mother Goose, and I can say almost every story in our reader by heart." "Why, Miles, I am surprised!" exclaimed Mamma. "This world is full of stories. You can find a story in everything in this world. Suppose you begin with a cup of cocoa you are drinking." "But, Mamma, that can't tell me a story," laughed Miles. "Oh, no," replied Mamma, "but I can tell you the story. It is this: One beautiful morning, a sweet boy baby came to live in this world. He came to a home in Venezuela. That very day his papa was starting a cocoa plantation. He planted the beans from which he was to get his cocoa in a nursery. Not in the baby's nursery, but in a place where young plants spend their first years, until they are old enough to go out into the world. As the papa placed plantain leaves over the cocoa beans, he said, 'Ah, here is a bean which I have not planted yet. I will plant this bean by itself and call it baby's plant. I will see which grows the faster, baby or the plant.' 7 days later the baby's papa visited the nursery and saw that the cocoa bean had sprouted. He also visited baby's nursery, and he declared that baby smiled at him. 'The plant and the baby are both growing very fast,' he said. 2 years later the papa was holding baby one day, and the darling jumped out of his arms and rushed into the garden. 'The pet is quite a child now,' said the papa. 'Of course, I can't keep him in one place. I suppose my cocoa plant wants to be moving about also, now that it is 2 years old. I will go and see it.' So the papa took baby's cocoa plant and all the other cocoa plants and planted them out of doors. He watered them carefully for 2 years and a half. Then they began to blossom, and the finest blossoms were on baby's plant, or rather on baby's tree. 4 months later the blossoms turned into fruit. In due time baby's papa gathered the fruit. It was about an inch long and of a violet color. The fruit had white meat and contained 25 seeds. Baby had the first cup of cocoa that was made from those seeds, and who knows but that you are drinking the last?" "Perhaps I am," said Miles. End of chapter 13.
Chapter 14. Polly's Clock by Mary Cecil. This clock was a real friend to little Polly, and probably you suppose it was in her home. But no, it was not one of those little mantel clocks that tick so very fast that they seem to say, not tick-tick, but quick-quick, or time flies, time is passing. Neither was it a tall, old-fashioned clock, much taller than Polly herself, with a round, rosy face and large figures which tell the time. Neither was it a clock with a cuckoo coming out every hour. This friend of Polly's was on the steeple of a town hall near her house, and the hands were so large, and the figures so clear, that one could see the time even if he were off in the hills which surrounded the town. And at night an electric light burned behind the clock face and made the figures as plain as in the daytime. Polly's friend saw much that was going on in the world, for the town hall stood opposite the church, and behind the church was a large schoolhouse. When the hands pointed to 12 o'clock, such a troop of noisy children as passed up the street. And on Sunday, when the church bell began to toll, the clock looked down on old and young, going to the service. Many in the morning on weekdays came men with dinner pails going to their work, and sometimes at noon boys and girls carried these pails to their fathers, in the shops, that they might have a warm dinner. In winter the sleighs went flying by right under the clock, and the bells tinkled merrily as if to say, "We can make music too, old clock, even if we can't make it every hour." In the summer the carriages passed under the clock, the horses with their fly nets on, while the sun poured down on the people's heads. The clock to Polly seemed to say, "Never mind, black beauties. When my hands point straight down at you, at 6:30, the air will be cooler." The bank was next to the town hall, and so the clock saw money going in and out, although of course it couldn't see the bank bills and the silver dollars that the people put in their pockets. Every Thursday morning a team came from one of the factories and carried away a big bag of money, which was to be paid to the workmen. Polly used to watch all these things that the clock saw, and she would look up to see what it was thinking about. For to Polly, with her childish imagination, the clock seemed a real person, and its round glass face was her friend's face. If you have never seen an illuminated clock, you would have been surprised indeed to look from the window in the evening and see the dark street, the stars up above, and between them this round face hung in mid-air. Now Polly, as I told you, had much imagination. Perhaps she had a little more than most children. She saw many things in her mind, and the longer she watched the clock, the more friendly it grew to her. If she so far forgot herself as to make up a face when the weather was stormy, and she could not go out to play, she would look up at the clock, and his calm face seemed to say, "For shame, Polly, you making up a face at this nice rain, which is going to make your flower seeds grow and your papa's lettuce come up. For shame to put on a pouting face because you can't go out. What do you think of me? I can never go down in the street to look carefully at the pigeons picking up their crumbs. I always have to look at them from way up here, and you can do as much as that today by looking out of your window. Why, you can stand at your window and see enough to make any girl happy. Suppose that I should put on a wry face because I am out in the rain, with the drops splashing against my face. What would you think? And what would the children think, as they hurried along to school?" This was a long speech for the clock to make, and Polly was glad that it stopped to strike the hour, for she felt a little ashamed of herself. And by the time the clock had finished striking, her face had cleared. One day little Polly could not see her old friend as she looked out of the window. Nothing had happened to the clock, I can assure you. The trouble was with Polly herself. Her eyes were full of tears, and yet if you had known what was the matter, you could not have felt so very, very sorry for her. For though Polly was usually a brave girl, and seldom lost her temper, today she was crying more for temper than for sorrow. No, the old clock looked as kind and amiable as ever, and yet Polly did not see her friend. If she had, I'm sure it would have brought back her better self at once. Polly only cried, and complained about her seatmate at school, who had done something which made Polly angry. It was only a slight thing, but Polly let it fret her, and the more she thought about it, the worse she felt. But her friend, the clock, was to be the good angel to bring her to herself. While Polly had been crying, it had been growing dark, and, as she wiped her eyes and happened to look toward the window, the face of the clock became bright from the electric light behind it, and Polly clapped her hands with delight. "Why, you dear old friend, what am I thinking of? Crying in this way, and you seeing me. I am ashamed indeed." And Polly wiped her face and tried to smile. "And I know what you are going to say to me, old clock," she added. "You want me to go and make up with my seatmate, and I mean to, at once." And as if to say yes, the clock struck 1 for the half-hour. "I knew you would say yes," said Polly, "and you are a friend worth having, for your face always seems to show me the brightest side of everything."
Chapter 15 The Squirrel's Harvest by Mary E. McAllister. Little Marjorie came running into the house one cold November morning, her cheeks aglow and her eyes big with wonder. "Oh, Mamma," she cried, "what do you think? I saw a dear little squirrel out in the woods picking up beech nuts, and he ate them whole, Mamma, and then ran away as fast as he could. What made him do so?" Mamma smiled at her daughter and said, "Marjorie, if you will take off your bonnet and cloak, we will sit by the fire, and I will tell you a story about the squirrels." So Marjorie ran to put away her wraps, and in a few minutes was cozily huddled in Mamma's lap to listen. "Out in the woods," began Mamma, "in a hollow tree, is a little house where lives a very happy family consisting of Papa Squirrel, Mamma Squirrel, and their 2 children, Fly and Fleet. The door of their house is a hole in the side of the tree, and just inside they have a cozy parlor, carpeted with the softest leaves, and a storehouse where they store away food for the long winter. All through the summer, Papa and Mamma Squirrel, with Fly and Fleet, played merrily in the woods, running on the ground, climbing trees, jumping about on the branches, and scampering very fast to their snug home, at the sound of dogs or mischievous boys. At night they slept safe and warm on the soft carpet of their parlor, and so the weeks and months of summer passed quickly by, and autumn came. One morning Papa Squirrel went out to take a run before breakfast. He found something white spread over the ground. The air was not soft and warm, but raw and chilly, and it stung his toes as he ran along. So he hurried home and said to Mamma Squirrel, "My dear, Jack Frost has come, and we must all go to work with a will, for he has shaken the nuts from the trees, and if we do not gather them before he brings the snow, we shall have nothing to eat during the cold winter. The ground is covered with frost already." So, after they had breakfasted on a few old nuts, Papa Squirrel, Mamma Squirrel, Fly, and Fleet started gaily out to find their winter's store of food. They did not need to carry bags as you have to do when you go nutting, for right inside their cheeks were little pockets made on purpose to carry nuts. They all scampered to the nearest nut tree, and each squirrel worked busily until he had filled his pockets just as full as he could, and his cheeks stuck out big and round on either side. Then he ran and emptied the nuts from his pockets in a pile on the ground in front of his house. Then with his sharp teeth he gnawed the hard shell from the nuts and put the clean white meats away in the little storehouse. So they all worked busily till the sun sank low in the west, and they were so tired that they were glad to go into their house and sleep soundly till the morning. Many days through the chilly autumn they worked, until at last their storehouse was filled with walnuts and beechnuts, and Papa Squirrel said, "Now we have enough food to last through the winter, and we can rest." That very night Papa Squirrel waked from his sleep and heard the wind blowing, and thought to himself, "We shall soon have snow." And sure enough, when he went to the door to look out in the morning, the ground was covered with snow. Snowflakes were flying in the air, and the wind was blowing a big drift right up in front of their door. "Oh," said Mamma Squirrel, "I'm so glad we have gathered our nuts." "Yes," said Papa, "and we are warm and comfortable. Now we can take a long nap, and when we wake up hungry, we shall have plenty to eat." And Fly and Fleet danced about on the soft leaf carpet of their parlor and cried, "What a nice home we have!" Little Marjorie lifted two shining eyes to Mamma's when the story was finished, and said, "That was such a nice story, Mamma. I did not know that the squirrels had a home. Does the good Father who gives me my home take care of the squirrels too?" "Yes," said Mamma. "God cares for everything that He has made." "And the squirrel that I saw in the woods was putting the beechnuts into his pockets to take home. Isn't it funny?" said Marjorie. End of chapter 15.